Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, friends of the Dar, our outstanding guests. Good evening and welcome to tonight's lecture, part of the Dar al-Athar al-Islamiyyah's 28th cultural season. Tonight, we delve into the importance of culture. And as the title suggests, the role of culture in sustainable development. And we're very lucky tonight to have with us Dr. Mirza Hasan to talk to us about this relationship. In tonight's lecture, Dr. Mirza Hasan will define sustainable development and talk to us about the foundations of its development, be it economic, social, or environmental. Dr. Hasan will also talk to us about the relationship of this development and with its previous foundations in culture. Dr. Mirza Hasan deals with improving awareness and culture as other pillars of development and linking culture with social stability, reviewing the experiences of countries that have made culture amongst their strategic priorities, which confirms its importance in creating human capital capable of production and global competition. Dr. Mirza Hasan was elected between 2006 and 2022 to represent 13 countries as Executive Director in the World Bank Group, WBG. He was Dean of the Board of Executive Directors at the WBG between 2012 and 2022. Dr. Hasan was the State Undersecretary of the Industrial Sector, the Director of Public Authority for Industry in Kuwait, the Dean of Colleges of Business Administration at Kuwait University, and the Cultural Counselor of the Embassy of Kuwait in Washington, D.C. Additionally, he is the author and co-author of several research studies, none of which were done on the effects of ringing mobile devices, which is a quick reminder just to switch our mobiles off during this lecture. So now please join me in welcoming Dr. Mirza Hasan to tonight's lecture. Dr. Mirza.
Assalamu alaikum. Good evening. And shukr mawsool لك Sheikh Hassa for giving me this opportunity to present what I can say is a difficult topic. You know, when you talk about development and sustainability, it's all about finance, economic policy. But if you want to put this cultural dimension into it, is not easy. And many of big organizations, which is they are responsible of doing development, they just not into their literature, to bring, the work of culture and the values into the development. Although they did it at the peripheral, but is not being the main core of their business. What we learned that people culture matters to the development. And that links between development and culture has been weakened with the people when they started to adopt into the Western values. And that process of adaptation wasn't took within the system in order to grow naturally. It was a disruption of that type of development, because people at that time, they've been fascinated with the way, the West doing development, technology, learning, and health, or aspect of the life and the lifestyle. For that's why, the adaptation of that type of culture, it wasn't that much successful when you study the theory of the development in those culture. Now we learned that the people culture should be utilized in any development agenda. It matters, is good for the development. But each country, it has its own culture for itself, and that attribute of cultures needs to be worked on it and to be injected into the development. And the base of the development, where comes what we call it the Western way of development, it comes with the colonization and the trade and the new technology which has been migrated from to two. For example, I remember the literature we produce. There is no country in the globe, they have amount of saving, which is 40% of their GDP, like China. And all the literature which came mainly from the US universities is about promoting Chinese to spend more. And he said, if you develop this internal culture of spending, then your economy will grow at a faster rate. If it's 10, it will become 15, 18. But the Chinese doesn't spend, they spend as what they need. The space they use as what they need. They don't have like these big places over their capacity. And to impose that culture of consumption on the Chinese from all these, top economists, it didn't work in China. So that's why the adaptation of the culture needs to be looked at it in the context of development from the dimension of the value of these societies. And there is nothing what we call culture neutral. Maybe there is one thing, similarity between, the capitalism and the way, what we say, the East Asian / China doing the business of, working very hard. You find it in two cultures, but to the different degrees. And from working hard to produce more, and from producing more, you do saving, and from that saving, you do the investment. And that you find it neutral across some cultures when it comes to the production of the goods and services. But it's different within the culture if you go deeply and look into it. So this work of, producing more and the saving and in order to do the investment out of the saving, because what you produce, you consume, and what you don't consume, you save, and what you don't say, what you save, you go and invest it. So this came about, to do different culture, how they look at into that saving when it comes to the investment. For example, in the West, they look at it, it's like a triumph of individualism, you made it, you made a wealth. And that's why you find the concentration of the wealth in many of these societies in the top 1% of the population. And that's individualism, which pushing competition, efficiency, and maximizing the profit. This is where made these free enterprises is different. When you go to Japan, when they sell their institutions into the private sector, that individuality didn't came with the Japanese. And that's why you find in Japan, that this gap of wealth is not there, because the culture is different in the way you are doing that business. I remember when I graduated, when I was studying engineering at the US, they sent me for internship to General Motors. And my job during that internship to observe a working station in an assembly line, and to observe that, the gentleman who was sitting on that workstation, he has different parts, he needs to collect it and put it in a shape and send it to the next station. So my job was looking at him to see how much he's using both hand efficiency, so not one hand sitting idle, not working. So that type of culture of efficiency and maximizing that efficiency, so you can reduce number of workers working in that station, and instead of 2 you need 1. That concept, when you go and look at it in different industry, it wasn't there. Now, the way I'm gonna present this topic to you in 3 categories. First of all, what is the relation between cultural heritage and development? Because if you go to nations and countries, they have heritage. They have like the pyramid, the ruin, the churches, and the old cities. These are a cultural heritage. And these cultural heritage, because in the culture you have two parts. One is static, one is dynamic. The static part of the culture, which is the heritage, the cultural heritage, you find it everywhere. And that cultural heritage is a source of understanding, the identity of the people, the way they live. And this is where we looked into it and we said, how much we can use this cultural heritage in economics development. Can we do that? Then we go to the role of value in the development. Now that's the static part. The dynamic part, the cultural heritage is there, you need to use it. That's the static. The dynamic one is the role of the values. Each society, they have their own values. How you can inject that values into the development. And that values comes, the way the people live, religion, some ethical leaders. But we find these values, sometimes they have a conflict with whatever being produced today from science and technology. So that needs also to be looked into it when you're going to design your development agenda. Then we have the interlink between the behavior and development. So behavior is coming from the culture. The cultural influence the behavior. So that's why, the more you are open in your culture, the more you're going to adapt to different behavior. So the industrialization in the early stage, it came when those people became open. If you look at the Islamic civilization from 900 to 1200, when they've been open, they started to learn a lot and they develop a lot. So this value of and changing the behavior to looking to the other societies, so from closed societies becoming the open societies. And this is where people, when they start to change their behavior, which is linked to the culture, then they try to become, adjusting their cultural values and behavior toward, the new development. And usually I believe, because honestly, and when you're gonna adopt these values and culture into any society, linking it to the development agenda, don't just drop it on these people, because they will not gonna accept it. You just need to take it gradually. It's not like a TV, you can bring it to your home, it's plug and play. It doesn't work when it comes, into the development agenda. You need to take the culture into that dimension. And countries who really looked into that behavior change linked to the culture, when they want to compress everything in a short time, and they want to leapfrog whatever they missed, it didn't work. It didn't work. So I went to some education system in a country. They want to improve the education over 2 years. But they forget the culture has been created in that education system. So you cannot come and adopt that system without you having this process of change and internality into it in order to go and to reach whatever objective you set for yourself when it comes to that place. So that's why your teacher is not being prepared, your facility is not preparing, the society. Sometime I went to countries, the one who fought me for changing their education is the parent. They say, we didn't use this type of education. We don't know how to educate our kids in the way you are teaching them. So this is where created, the resistance. So the behavior and development and linked to culture, it's extremely important. In any development agenda, we need to do culture evaluation. And we are not doing that. And the multilateral institutions, they realize the importance of doing the culture evaluation. In any development, if I want to change the society, if I want to grow better, if I want to do hard working, if I want to do the human capital, I need to do the culture evaluation. And this transformation, we studied this country who transformed from to two, and why some they've been successful, why some failed in that transformation. It's about, we didn't address this cultural evaluation, and we didn't do it. And this, the behavior biometer, it's very important in any development agenda. And it's important when we need to study it prior to any move we want to do. But I will tell you, during my time at the World Bank, we didn't do it. And why we didn't do it? Because it's difficult. It's not easy. And why is difficult? Because there is no cultural documentation. We didn't do any documentation. Me, when I sit with my friend here in Kuwait, we say, we missed the old time. But what we missed in the old time? What is the thing we missed in the old time? Is it the way we're living, our school, our trust? What is it? So that's cultural documentation in any society. So in order to incorporate it into development agenda, it's important. I was telling someone, I said, when I was studying that, about cultural documentation, I say my life before, I'm saying it, we missed something, but I don't know what I missed. But I'm today much better in life than before. People at that time, it wasn't, poor, our houses, was, primitive, the way we lived, in the 60s. But still I missed something. So that's where we need, the cultural documentation into that process. And this is that we avoid the relation between culture and human factor, which is extremely important, and we need to pay attention to it. And why we need to pay attention to it? Because this is where I got the maximum impact and result from any development agenda. Now, in any strategy I want to do in the development, I need to have this lens of culture into it. I need to link it to every level of this strategy. Every level of the strategy, I need to, from education to the health to the agricultural, from whatever infrastructure. So I need to put the cultural dimension into it. And what is why I want to do that? I want to do that because the culture, if you look at the cultural in the previous ages, it's all about defining a solution. You find certain culture created around certain cities, certain organization, people. It's all about defining a solution to their problem. And that solution become the way of living and become a culture. So that's why we need it, because it's a way of solving the problem, and we link it to the culture. And if you look at the way people address the climate issue, or the way, they created their food, it was really, a cultural dimension to it. I remember I went to one of African city. They have a house, which is a modern house, but that house been taken from their way at indigenous people urbanizing themselves. When you go in that house, the temperature outside, it's 40. You go in the house, you lose 60% to 70% of the heat just because of the way of the air circulate. And when it comes to these, the lower level, it's really a cool air. It's all been learned from the culture, how the people live under harsh weather and heat. And then we need the cultural is also, if we need to do the culture, we need to communicate it with the people. You cannot keep the culture, on the books. You need to communicate it with the people. You need to teach it to the people. That's where you create a value society. Communication is a very powerful tool, and we need to utilize it in terms of to really bring this culture and value into the society and into our development agenda. always in the culture change, you need a champion. In any change, you need a champion. If you don't have it, create one. You need it. It's important. If you look at all the nations who really transform these nations, is the champion. Even if you take a sector like education, oral health, you need a champion in order to change the people. And that champion, really, who is going to sell you the culture from exchanging whatever value we have as a society and borrowing from the others what they have, good ones. So that mix between exchange and borrowing through the champion, it's really powerful tool in the development agenda. And that's why, in every culture, to be open, you need to be yourself culturally confident. You believe in your culture. Because the more you are confident in your culture, the more you're going to be open to the others. You are not going to be shy away. So that's very important. And who is going to do that? That champion going to do that. And if you look at these development agenda happening, they took that champion and he took the society to accept to become open to other, what we say, the other development model. Look at the Japanese, the way they do their business. And it's reflected to the culture of Japan. If you take the capitalism and the Japan, which is, they protected their employer long life work, that protection made the worker is loyal to their organization, trusting their organization, and the organization in return gave them, all what they need, long life guarantee, health, education, whatever, all this has been given because they linked into this loyalty, development, product quality, into the way of Japanese looking into their society. So they became group thinker rather than to become individualist and looking for that productivity. Now, culture needs, honestly, deep thinking because that agenda is not easy. So that's why when you're going to do any development, look at your layers of culture and how you want to inject that one into your development agenda. And by the way, there is different technique for the same problem. If you go to the same problem, you find the solution is different. Why is different? Because it has a dimension of culture and values into it. Look at this civilization created around the bank of the great rivers. Nile, Euphrates, Indus, You find each city in the way they produce their food is different. And why is different? Because the culture was different at that time, the way they aggregate. And for example, look at this between the South Spain, which is Catholic, North Morocco, which is Islamic, and they are living under the same environment, the same atmosphere, but different way of doing, the way growing their foods. Why? Because it has a cultural dimension, and both of them, they are getting the productivity, but the culture matters in their development agenda. And that's why, why the technology, because we didn't give that thoughts to the technology, why technology didn't succeed in certain societies. It's all because of we didn't put enough thinking into how we're going to transfer that technology and for those society to adapt into that technology, incorporating their culture. And by the way, every product you see, it's a product of culture. If this technology you see, it came from a culture. You set up the university, research, dedication, everything you put together. It's a series of events happen to put that type of technology. And it didn't come. So if you imagine you're going to come and parachute that technology into a society without the evolution of it, the process, that's why the acceptability of this technology in certain society didn't take there, or even those who are receiving it, they couldn't develop it more or understand it more. Now, I waited just to put a definition now for the culture. So what is culture? I didn't say it early. I wait until to just build up my case in order to define the culture. It's a set of values which influence us on how we are interact with each other and how we work together to achieve certain objectives and results. But the term cults came from the Latin word of worship. Then it has been modified to become like it's a practice of cultivating the soil, and then being extended to become the cultivation of the refinement of mind and manners. So that's what we carried now, the final terminology of the culture. And it is a distinct which make difference between one society to another society. And it is a mistaken if you don't recognize the culture of these societies in order to bring the change for them. So the cultural dimension becoming one of the most important element in the development, and the way we, honestly, the way I was looking at it, you put culture as a part of development. I say the opposite. Development should be part of the culture. So that's why we're reversing that. So if you want to do a cultural change, then inject development into it. As I mentioned in the second slide, how I'm present this topic, we looked at the cultural heritage of nations, countries, societies. The past is very important. In 2015, 193 countries came around the table, endorsed 17 sustainable development goals. And what these goals mention, we need to protect people, planet by 2030, and no one should be left behind. So that's all the sustainable development goal. And a part of that sustainable goal, it was a climate change, natural disaster, and conflict. And we learned that these are very important in the cultural heritage. I'm talking now about the static part of the culture, not the dynamic part. So that's why, people left their habitat under conflict, across the border, and under natural disaster or the climate change. The drought in many of African countries led people to leave their environment, their natural habitat, to go into the city or other places or cross the border. And that's why it really affected these cultural heritage. From that migration from rural to the city, and these places became like, because they have the space, became like, damaged, people was living on it, and no attention has been paid to it. We understand that these are important for the economic growth of the country, and you create an asset out of that. And that's why destroying it is not going to be an advantage for this country. So that's why we created the culture of maintenance. It wasn't there, because if you have this cultural heritage, and if you don't maintain it, it will be disappeared. And that's why you're not going to benefit from it. I'm not looking at it from the heritage in terms of these are important in your. No, I'm going to look at it now as an economics. You can make a lot of money and assets out of that. So these historical landmarks is extremely important in the development agenda. So how we can use these valuable assets smartly in order to make an economy around it. The economist John Ruskin said that great nations write their autobiographies in 3 manuscripts: the book of their deeds, the book of their words, and the book of their art. And extended that no one can be understood without reading the other 2. But the only one you can trust, it's the book of art, because that you can visualize your heritage. And that's why when we work in that, the book of art, and link it to the development agenda. That's one where we came, this artistic tradition, which came from the artwork and from all these writing, you find it on the wall of these monuments. So we created an industrial application out of it. Clothes, bags, architecture, so this became like a source of industrialization of the art and the heritage. And that was extremely important. And there is not something what we call standardized architecture. It's sometimes not suitable for certain environment, for certain group, and for certain. So that's why we created this, what we call it, the indigenous urbanization, in order to put the new architecture into that environment. So sometimes we take this cultural heritage, for granted, and we ignore it when it comes to the development agenda. The Nobel laureate Amartya Sen said, the interaction between the interaction of culture and development is everywhere. That's why you cannot ignore it. You should look into it in everywhere, from your architecture, from your industrial design, from your urbanization, from the way you're going to live. The architecture is extremely important. And that's why when you go to the Anka civilization in Peru, you find the seed technology they create for agricultural. It was unique to their culture, and then becoming a university where you can teach how you can produce this type of seeds for the better plantation. But also we learn, because this is an asset, we learn how to make these cultural heritage sites, it's resilient to climate change, resilient to the conflict, resilient to natural disasters. And because why? Because if we make it resilient, then we're going to create what we call a responsible tourism out of it. And the private sector will not going to come invest if something going to disappear. So you need to sustainability. They need to trust that somebody going to maintain this site in order to build an economy around it. I remember, and by the way, you encourage creativity. By putting this site and maintain it, you're going to develop a lot of entrepreneurial and creativity around it. I remember when I went to the Maldives, they are blessed with the natural resources. And they created a good tourism industry, but also expensive industry, not a cheap industry for tourism. But when this ocean pollution drifted many of these plastics into Maldives, and I went and I saw it, it's like a mountain of plastic, these type of, water bottles, among others, mountain. So what they did, they are creative, the Maldivian. They created a tourism out of that ocean, because there is a lot of people, they believe in environment. They want to fight all these environmental issues. They want to preserve this nature. So they created 20% of their tourists coming from the environmentalists to fight that ocean pollution plastic. And what they did, Nike came and they did the thread out of these plastic. They did walls, among many things they came. So creativity came by preserving their natural habitats, plus, whatever came into it in order to create another business. So that's very important if you put this one. So the World Bank actually started to involve cultural heritage in the early 80s, when they rehabilitated, the Hafisa neighborhood in Tunis, Medina, and we upgraded the Lahore historic walled city. That's the two things we started to do it on the 80s. We provided around like 90 technical assistants, where we show many of these countries the important and the asset you have to create around that heritage. So we finance, between technical and direct finance, 400 operations in order to preserve these sites or maintain it or to create an industry around it. And some of the industry we created, we paid for the private sector to put hotels to improve the transportation. And in every dollar we put, we mobilized $15. And in the latest year, $25, and created $150 in terms of economic return. And thanks God to the Italian, which they paid us $150 million to start that program, because Italian, they know how much, the value of these cultural heritage in order to generate an income. And again, the whole motive was here to generate revenue from this existing assets. So this actually what we did in Hafisa and Lahore, and these all financing, direct financing from the World Bank. But if we go now to the global tourism industry, so this is I need it for my development. The global tourism industry is around 11.1 trillion. By 2030, it will become 17 trillion. And it consists of 25 from the global market. Who's taking the biggest share of that global tourism? North America, then Europe, then the Asia Pacific, and the Middle East. And that's why we're gonna, and by the way, in Middle East, they have the most of these cultural heritage, but the most underutilized. So that's why we need to create an asset out of it. So that's why we put a lot of resources into that. By the way, countries will not borrow for cultural heritage, honestly. I was fighting for them to borrow, and they don't borrow. They want to do schools, they want to do roads, they want to improve airports, but they don't see the value until we did all this technical assistance and we show them. We show them. And in fact, by the way, the Grand Museum of Egypt, we offered to give them 200 million, but they turned us down because everybody wants to pay them. The Japanese paid $450 million. They didn't take our money, and cheaper than us to do that grand mosque. So because they saw the value of this type of investment in terms of creating assets. But what's really not missing in the Middle East and not being utilized, it's the religious tourism. That's another industry not being explored in the region. We have the biggest number of prophet and imams and not being utilized in a way to create a business out of it. Saudi Arabia now, they are looking for this continuous people visiting Mecca or Medina, not during the season, but they want to make it like more stable. So they can see the value now of that industry. And even now they are thinking to open the Baqi', for the Shia to come and visit there and to make it another big industry. That's you're going to talking about 20 to 25 million of tourism going to come into Saudi Arabia for this type of religious site. The only one which is honestly they are not utilizing it fully is the Iraqi. They are not utilizing that industry because they don't see it, it's how much important. But also part of it is coming from still, this political tension and conflict. So the religious tourism is another ball game. I'm not going to talk about it here. During COVID, many countries learned how their economy contracted just because they lost the tourists. Just the loss. Look how much, 73%, of contraction in the tourism made all these countries go into the debt, which is until this time they are suffering from it. Maldives, their debt was before COVID around $7 billion. Today is $36 billion. Just because of 2 years of COVID, they cost them, and by the way, it takes a lot of time, to repay it. And just paying the interest on their debt, it's costing them 40% of their budget. So now they saw the value of this tourism when their all airport stopped, all the tourism stopped. And what really I like about the Maldivian, because I work with them a lot, they paid for the resort to stay and not to close. Because and this is one of the part of the debt they accumulated. They say, we pay you money, please don't fire anybody, stay, and we're going to rebound. And by the way, the first one who opened their airport, not a year after COVID, it was the Maldivian. And they had 20% of the tourists came there. Now, so this cultural heritage and tourism is very important. Why? Because it consists of 9% of the global investment. If you go to the global investment, 9% goes for this tourism sector. Out of 11 jobs we created, 2 goes for the tourism, half of it women and youth. Some of the countries becoming the number 1 or 2nd export of generating income. In Egypt is 2nd after Suez Canal. In Jordan it's become number 1. So that, and by the way, I'm coming to the Jordan. But also, we as a bank, because we saw the value of that in terms of creating jobs, taking people out of poverty, creating an economy, entrepreneurship, creativity, the important, all these things for the development agenda. That's why we pay attention, after any conflict, we need to go immediately to try to restore these historical sites, because we saw the value of it and we cannot leave it. And that's why we went for Bosnia-Herzegovina Mostar Bridge, and we increased the tourism in 2006 by almost 20-fold to 70,000, just to restore this bridge, which it came a funding from us, Aga Khan Foundation, and UNESCO. But also in Lebanon, I remember, we did all these sites from Baalbek, Byblos, Saida, and Tripoli. We invested in this site. And I remember in Saida, we hold, if you go to that city, we gave $200 million to just upgrade these facilities as a loan. But unfortunately not being utilized. It's utilized now. I'm not saying no. There is a number of people goes and visit them. But because of the political environment of Lebanon, these are not being utilized fully. I remember in 2007, 2005, when we took a land filling site of Hadaq al-Azhar, the Azhar Garden, and we turned it into an economic zone. And then we upgraded Al-Mu'izz Road. And that's where also these two, it was linking between the Fatimiyya Cairo to the Khidewi Cairo. So these type of investment we did, and by the way, before people are coming, just going to the pyramid, now they're staying in Cairo for 1 to 2 days to see all these historic sites. And the number of tourism in Egypt now is becoming close to what they generate from Suez Canal, and growing at that rate, it's going to be number 1 generating income and hard currency and creating jobs for Egypt. I took 45 minutes so far, so sorry, And if you go to the Batra and al-Maqtas, which it has a religion dimension, and Wadi Rum or Valley Rum in Jordan. So we did this one, a loan from the World Bank to create a tourism, because this is where Jesus baptized. So we created a religious tourism, and then you have the Batra, and for adventure tourism, we put Wadi Rum and Old Amman. But what is really interesting, when we built the airport, Queen Alia Airport, the private sector built it, not the government. We thought the government don't build it, don't put money, we will put money and we will build it. What happened, doubled the tourism in Jordan, it's the airport, the one who's managing airport, because those people who's managing the airport, it was a French company. Some Kuwaiti also investors went with them. They make their money from the volume. And the only way to create the volume to promote these sites. So that's why putting the airport, linking it with the private sector, making it money. So that's why, they doubled the visitor. And now with all the low-cost airline, they attracted them to come to Jordan, and now they want to do the expansion of the airport to do this low-cost terminal for I need to go quickly because I took almost like 45 minutes and I have a couple of slides. Now, cultural should be integrated in our life, because why? Because we need to look at development is enhancing of our life. So that's extremely important, because this, if you go in every culture, you find this hierarchy of values. And that's what I'm going to talk about, a static culture. Sorry, a dynamic culture. I finished from the static, I'm going to the dynamic. So because in everyone you find there is some values. And that's why we need to do the evaluation and analysis to go into that culture, how to use the culture in order to improve the life. Because the whole culture created through the solution of problem facing the humanity. So that's why I need to use all these value in that one. Because it's impact the human behavior, and it's also, when you become more cultural, you're going to decide what type of business model you want to adopt. Japanese, they have their own one way of business model when they imported this capitalization. They didn't take it all. They enhanced it, they modified it to their culture. And that's why, you know, and also the political system, because it's also reflecting their culture. So what is the economic return of the culture? First, you're going to do better economy. You're going to put better growth, create more jobs, take the tourism sector. You're going to interact with people. You're going to communicate better. And that's why, you know, the behavior, it's founded by the culture. Because if you go to change the behavior and we enter into the change process, you need the cultural dimension. And that behavior sometimes is coming from the values, and the values coming from different aspects. Like the Protestant ethics honestly created the capitalism. And Confucian ethics, and later on the samurai code of honor, created this, what we call it now, the East Asia values. Started with the Japanese, now Korean, Hong Kong, Singapore, you know. So these type of values entered into their development model, respecting, trust. Today, the banking sector in Japan is highly trusted. It's extremely highly trusted. And Ahmed knows that, you know, they are paying the lowest interest rate, but highly trusted. But go to the Lebanon, who's going to trust, you know, the banking sector? Why? Because it has a cultural dimension of protecting people money to the cultural dimension of making more profit. You know, so that's cultural dimension, even into their banking system, even into your financial system. It really helps in your development. And the ethics was very crucial role in development. Now, that's development also, the business development of morality, which really, you know, challenged many countries when they moved into industrialization. Look at when Europe went into industrialization, Eastern Europe and Russia didn't enter into that. Why? Because they adopted the socialist system. Corruption was there high. The contractual obligation is not being, you know, trusted. So that's why they couldn't integrate into that industrialization came into the Europe. So that's why, you know, these values, if those societies stayed in certain values, could integrate much faster and better than that what they has been adopted. And again, I just want to go here into the culture and communication. We need to really spend time on this communication methods in order to create that culture, because I need it for the development. When Egypt, after Morsi, went with the IMF to do 12 billion program, no way, if you look at that program, that people are going to buy it. Removing subsidies, increasing the electricities, you know, gas, you know, no way. But when the IMF spent amount of money in communication, and how that's going to be linking to many things in which the Egyptians are proud of, their country, their culture, their ancestors, and they led everybody to buy into that program happened. But really what is really important here, and also in the communication, you need to build up the trust. When people give you something, You need to deliver for them and continue delivering for them. Otherwise, if you lose the trust, then you're not going to have this development dimension. This is also very important, the relation between cultural of work ethics and learning. See, here we have a rentier economy, اقتصاد ريعي. And unfortunately, الاقتصاد الريعي or the rentier economy became a rentier ethics, a rentier culture. And no nation can move from one development agenda to another one, or to one growth model to another one, if they don't have these work ethics and learning, knowledge. And if you have, and I went to the societies, especially under rentier economy, you know, when a student resists to learn and people doesn't want to work, then forget you're going to have a development agenda. That's why you need the cultural change. That's extremely important if you want to go and change. So, in conclusion, you know, culture interact with development in many ways. Development is influenced by human behavior, which comes from value and culture. And human behavior will enhance, you know, the cultural market, or the cultural market will enhance the human behavior. You need to create a market for the culture. Thank you.